Well, this week's guest on the Communicators just recently resigned as president of the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. ICANN is what it's called, and Rod Beckstrom joins us from Las Vegas. Mr. Beckstrom, thank you for being on the Communicators. Also joining us here in our Washington studio is Gautam Nagesh of Congressional Quarterly. He is the editor, in fact, of the Technology Executive Briefing for CQ. Mr. Nagesh, if you would start the questioning.
Absolutely. Hello, Rod. Our first question today is, who owns the Internet right now? Or the physical structure of the Internet?
Yeah, well, it's mostly owned by the private sector, by individuals, companies. Governments own a very small amount of it, but we estimate that over 85% of the Internet is actually owned by private individuals and firms, and if you look at the physical infrastructure involved.
And are they concentrated in any particular country, or is it fairly spread apart?
You know, we estimate there's about 2.2 or 2.3 billion users in the Internet today. Just over half of those are in Asia. So you can guess that about half of that investment overall is in Asia, and half is spread around the world. The United States has got a pretty good portion, Europe, but you've also got good penetration growing in Latin America and Africa.
So, Rod Beckstrom, who manages it?
Well, you know, the Internet is a magnificently decentralized creation. And so it's governed by a multi-stakeholder community with a lot of different organizations around the world, with more than 242 different countries and territories involved. And one of the key coordination bodies is ICANN. And ICANN and its community are the stewards for what we call the unique identifiers, or the domain names, the network addresses, and then what are some technical settings that are called the protocol and parameter registries. Those are the things that make the Internet look like one place. So they're governed through a very multi-stakeholder process with companies involved, government involved, individuals involved, and even civil society organizations.
Can you explain to our viewers what exactly it is that ICANN does to help manage the Internet?
Sure. Well, when we think about the Internet, we refer to it as one place or one thing, when in fact it's billions of private devices and millions of private networks, but it looks like one place. Why? Because domain names are unique and consistent all over the world, because every network address is unique. So your email address is unique and no one else has that same email address. That integrity of uniqueness is essential so that the Internet looks like one place. ICANN is a coordination body that was created to maintain the uniqueness of those things that makes the Internet look like one place.
So, Rod Beckstrom, you were president of ICANN for about 3 years, a little over 3 years. What were your goals going in, and do you think you achieved them?
My number one goal was to make ICANN a more international and global organization. Second objective was to upgrade it as to a world-class institution, as a nonprofit organization. And the thirdly was to execute the key strategic programs. And I think that we succeeded very significantly on all three fronts, despite some pretty serious headwinds and a very complex environment to get things done in.
Well, recently ICANN added new potential domain names, or took deposits on new potential domain names. How did that process go?
Sure, that process, you know, when ICANN was created, one of the reasons for the creation in the original mission statement was to create more consumer choice and competition. Because when we were formed, there was really one dominant domain name registry and registrar. Consumers didn't have a choice, and they had to pay about $35 a year to get a .com name, for example. And so ICANN was created to foster choice. So we've opened up the new top-level domains, and this is the third time in history we've done it, but by far the largest opening. The process started about 6 or 7 years ago. In 2005, the policy development process started. The policies were approved in 2008, and from 2008 to 2011, we were developing the details of the program. And then in the first half of this year, we opened it up for applications and closed it, and I think, as you know, received over 1,900 applications.
So $185,000 per application, correct?
That's right. That's exactly right.
What is that money used for, and who gets to hold on to it?
Okay. ICANN's a nonprofit organization, and this program was costed out on a break-even basis. So the $185,000 is an estimate of what it will cost to process those applications. There's legal checks, criminal background checks on officers of the applying institutions, financial checks, technical checks. There's review panels. There's objections that can be filed that have to be reviewed by arbitration panels. So it's a very complex program. Those are the estimated costs. If the costs come in lower than that, then the ICANN community will decide what should be done with those funds. They do not go to ICANN itself as an organization for covering any of its operations unless the community, for example, decided to do that. So that's the estimated costing for the program.
Rod, you mentioned that you look to internationalize ICANN. There have been growing calls for greater international involvement in the regulation of the Internet and other international telecom services. What is your response to some of these calls for, say, having the United Nations have a greater role in how the Internet is managed and regulated, which are opposed by lawmakers here in the U.S.?
Well, I think that the Internet coordination should continue to become more and more global, and we made significant strides over the last 3 years. We added more members to our Governmental Advisory Committee, so we have more than 110 governments of the world formally advising ICANN. We added more than 30 new members to what we call the Country Code Name Supporting Organization. Those are the domain name operators in different countries around the world. We built an international management team. When I came in, there was one foreign or non-English language fluency in the executive management team, one instance. When I left, there were 17, and we had members on our executive management team from China, Mexico, United Kingdom, France, Lebanon, and other parts of the world. So we made a lot of progress, and we also opened up the Internet itself to internationalization by including internationalized domain names. So that if you live in China now, you can actually type in domain names entirely in Chinese characters if you register your domain name under .zhongguo, which is the Chinese characters. We did the same thing with parties in India and around the world. So the route that used to be all Latin-based characters, that we sort of think of as English-like characters, is now includes international scripts. This was very important. With respect to the United Nations and the ITU, there is an interest, of course, by many governments in the world are struggling with how do you deal with the Internet? How do you deal with this incredible tsunami force of change that is shifting society, affecting governmental structures, etc. And when you have that level of change, of course, you've got different government bodies that might be seeking to change or extend their set of authorities to expand into an area such as the Internet. And I think that's what we see taking place here.
Now, how serious a threat for you is the notion of governments interfering with the domain name system or the Internet for censorship reasons, or in some cases for protection of intellectual property? We've seen a host of reasons why governments have sought to tap into the Internet's physical and network structure. Is that something that ICANN is concerned about, or you personally, now that you're no longer with the organization, is that something that you feel is a threat?
Yes, it's something I'm very concerned about. It's certainly something that ICANN and the Internet community are very concerned about, not only at the international level of international governmental bodies seeking to expand their authorities or mandate and sort of having a scope creep, but also national governments. And we saw that, for example, here in the United States of America with the SOPA debacle, when there was a proposal to create the Stop Online Privacy Act, and it included provisions that would have DNS filtering or blocking websites without a proper due legal process. This was extremely concerning, and the great news is that the netizens in this country and political activists in this country rose up with the leadership that Jimmy Wales and others demonstrated by taking Wikipedia offline for a day. And I think there was more than 10 million letters and emails in a single day, froze SOPA in its tracks. And this is part of the new reality that governments have to deal with, which is that when they try to go create new regulations that might harm the integrity and the openness of the Internet, there's very, very strong public responses. And I think we would see the same thing at the international level that we've seen at the national level. And that's a good thing, I would argue, because it keeps a check and balance going, because it's easy to talk about regulating the Internet, but it's a very difficult and dangerous thing to do, because very often the proposed prescription to fix a problem is much worse than the underlying disease or problem that some party feels they're trying to address. So we've got to keep the internet open. We've got to keep it unified. We need to keep it global, keep it as neutral as possible, and it should be governed by these open multi-stakeholder processes that include the technical experts that can make sure that the integrity of the system is managed. Because the end result that we all want to have is that we should each be able to communicate with anyone, anywhere, anytime in the world. And for that to happen, there has to be this global openness and the integrity in the system. And so I think that's what a lot of us care about, and we continue fighting for.
Rod Beckstrom, has the new app world that we live in now changed ICANN's mission?
Oh, I don't, interesting question. I mean, I'm here at Black Hat, there's a lot of discussion of apps and all the security vulnerabilities that come through this profusion of hundreds of thousands of new apps being built. Technology is exciting because it's always a changing game. Some parties have said, for example, that perhaps creating all these new apps are going to make domain names less useful or less valuable, but there's no indication of that happening so far. You see both a tremendous profusion of creativity and new applications on smartphones and tablets, and at the same time, we're seeing more creativity and growth in the domain name industry. So far, I don't see a big change, and yet at the same time, no one can predict the future in technology. Things just move so quickly. So we're all students of this magnificent process that continues to unfold.
Well, you've mentioned Black Hat. What is that? And in your previous life, you were the director of the National Cybersecurity Center. And is that why you're at Black Hat?
Well, I do have an affinity for the security community in the field, and I did start coming here. In fact, when I was in that position, I had the great honor of keynoting here in 2008. In fact, as I'm sitting here today, Sean Henry, former director of cybersecurity at the FBI, is giving his keynote this morning. But Black Hat is a preeminent security conference globally. There's about 7,500 people registered here this week. And then it's interesting because after 3-4 days of meetings with the security community, we have people from companies here, security companies, security experts, hackers here, the whole kind of ecosystem. Then on Friday and Saturday, there's another conference called DEF CON, which is a hackers conference. And I think that they're expecting somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 hackers, as well as some of the other security participants to be there. And I'll be attending DEF CON as well. So it's a very exciting time to hear what's going on in security, see the new threats, the new vulnerabilities in products, and also see what people are doing to counteract those. Rod
Beckstrom, you mentioned DEF CON, the hackers conference. They've confirmed that the head of the NSA, Keith Alexander, will be speaking, doing their keynote. You resigned your position because of the NSA, is that correct?
No, that's not correct. I expressed certain views when I resigned about the NSA, but I did not resign because of the NSA. I resigned because I felt that I'd done my term of service with the government and I was ready to move back to California and be with my family.
Well, in your letter of resignation, you said that you thought it was bad policy for security and privacy issues to be centered under a military agency such as the NSA.
Yes, I did say that, and I still believe that there needs to be a separation between civilian activities in cyberspace and those security activities and the military activities. It's an important principle in American constitutional history.
Now, Rod Beckstrom, currently cybersecurity is working its way through the Congress. Do you have views on the current attitude toward cybersecurity in the Congress?
Well, I think Congress is concerned, and I think a lot of people are concerned. The reality is anything attached to a network these days is vulnerable. And that's just the reality of this new hyper-transparent world that we live in. And I think that we're all struggling with trying to figure out how to best develop new policy structures and approaches for dealing with that. It's a challenge to do. It's much easier to write policy than implement successful programs, and no one's got all the answers. So I think it's good that Congress is focusing on it. I think it's also very important that they work closely with the global internet technical community, and as well as civil rights, civil liberties groups, and make sure that the right balance is achieved in any legislation that's created. And in general, I'm not a fan of a lot of regulation here. I mean, the internet is a force of its own. We have existing legal structures for many of the rights we have in society, and we have to be careful not to create new legislation and new laws that are very difficult to implement or that impinge upon this openness of the internet that we all enjoy.
You are watching C-SPAN's Communicators program. Our guest is Rod Beckstrom, who for 3 years served as president of the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. Prior to that, he served as director of the National Cybersecurity Center. He is a technical, I don't know, I guess the word is whiz, from Silicon Valley originally, graduate of Stanford University. Our guest reporter is Gautam Nagesh of Congressional Quarterly.
Rod, you discussed the legislation that's currently in front of Congress. Specifically in the Senate, we're seeing them debate a piece of legislation where the sponsors have really bent over backward to try to appease some of the concerns from privacy advocates, but they've also been forced to make some concessions on regulations. So what would you like to see from a cybersecurity law passed by Congress, if at all, this year?
I have not jumped in depth into that current proposed legislation, so I'm not in a position to go into it in any specific detail. I'm pleased to hear if concessions have been made to try to strike a balance. I haven't necessarily heard that feedback from all the communities that they're content with where we've gotten to yet. So I think there's more work to be done, and again, I think that we've got to be very careful and very deliberate in what we do.
How much can legislation or policy really make a difference? As you discussed, a lot of this is about implementation. What sort of differences could policy make? Are there any positive steps that could impact the operational state of cybersecurity right now?
Sure. I mean, good policies can always help, and then the challenge is how do you craft a good policy? One of the things that I believe in strongly, and this was also reflected in the book I co-authored called The Starfish and the Spider, is that when you're dealing with a decentralized phenomenon like the world of hacking and hackers, which is quite decentralized for the most part, then you want to deal with it in a decentralized way, usually, if you want to be successful. So I think that the U.S. government will be more successful in fostering, for example, collaboration centers that include government and private sector, law enforcement and others, that's voluntary, so state and local as well as federal. Foster the collaboration. Don't try to control it. Don't try to pull the information into the government, because that usually becomes a one-way, sucking sound, and there's not much information going the other way, and a lot of trust gets lost there. So I think we should focus on education programs in schools, make sure we're investing in cyber education, make sure we're investing to support collaboration, and make sure that we're supporting the research and development and the development of best practices. I think that's a better solution than trying to look at any sort of top-down approaches.
Rod Beckstrom, back to the top-level domain name issue. 1,900 or so applications. Is cyber squatting a legitimate business in this case?
It's actually a very tricky thing to define. Okay, it's an easy word to say, but there's different definitions of how people look at that. This program was created so that rights holders, parties that own a trademark or a service mark, have preference over those that don't. So there's a whole set of different protections put into this program to discourage cyber squatting if that relates to terms that are service marked or trademarked. Will there be some defensive registrations? And that's the term of when some parties might choose to go register their name in a new top-level domain, and they might feel they don't really want that, but they're doing it to protect their name or brand. Certainly there will be some level of that. However, most parties, when they do those so-called defensive registrations, actually link it back to their main website and use it to drive more business to themselves. And anyone who's doing that is actually deriving economic benefit out of having those registrations. So it's not a simple issue, and again, a lot of the smartest intellectual property experts in the world worked in this problem for 6 years, and they added in a lot of really strong protections into the program. So it's certainly much stronger with respect to intellectual property rights than any previous generic top-level domain round in ICANN's history.
Are you
certainly we'll learn.
Are you satisfied?
I'm sorry.
No, I apologize for interrupting, but Are you satisfied with IP protections around the world right now?
Oh, geez. That's a big question. Am I satisfied? I think that there's a number of challenges. So let's take the trademark system as an example. And the trademark system is designed by country, typically, by nation states, and then it has different categories. Typically, there's more than 40 categories in more than 100 countries that have these systems. So there's 4,000 different parties that can have the right to exactly the same trademark. Okay, so the trademark system is fractured by geography and industry category. The domain name system is unique. There's only one, brandname.com, for example. And so what it means is there's a fundamental mismatch there. So this fractured system is trying to map to a system that has integrity and is internationally unique. So you're always going to have tension there. So that's an imperfect flaw that just comes from history of how the trademark system was established by nation states. And the Internet's this new global system. So you've got incompatibility there. I think intellectual property rights enforcement is clearly more challenging in many cases because of all the jurisdictions around the world where the Internet is active and because of actions that parties can take. And I think that what we've seen in the ICANN community and the multi-stakeholder community is a lot of work to improve those programs. And there is an intellectual property constituency, for example, in ICANN that has prominent attorneys. But am I personally happy with the overall global system? I'd say no. Well, for one thing, I note that fundamental dichotomy in the architecture that's going to create ongoing tensions. And I note the difficulty of enforcement because of how open and unified the Internet is. So I think we've got some really interesting policy challenges we're going to have to work on for decades to come here.
And what about privacy protections?
Privacy protection, the Internet brings radical transparency to almost everything it touches. Privacy, it becomes a construct. It's an artificial construct, very important one, created by laws and institutions and enforcement. And so I think privacy is important because we all value it in our lives. And I think it's challenged by the Internet. And I think it's why it's really important that there's outspoken, articulate groups out there that and citizens, people around the world supporting the importance of some role of privacy in the Internet. And at the same time, people want openness. So those are the tensions, between the openness of the Internet, between the desires for privacy and the desires for intellectual property protection, and all those. There's not a simple solution that can solve that equation. And so we're going to find ourselves iterating around different solutions over time, I think, to get our hands around these issues.
Next question from Gautam Nagesh.
Obviously, the high price tag, we saw mostly companies applying for the domain name suffixes. But my question is, are domain names and therefore domain name suffixes, are they losing a little bit of their importance to personal users or consumers? Because right now, these days, when you go on TV, I'm sure people ask you for your Twitter handle as opposed to your .com or what have you, and I find that these are social media is often the primary identifier of Facebook, Twitter for many people these days. So how do you think that's affected the domain system and ICANN specifically?
Sure. When Facebook came out and started getting really popular about 5 years ago, some people predicted that domain name registrations by individuals would decline, maybe even start to shrink. It just hasn't happened. When the economic crisis hit, growth slowed international domain names, but now I think it's back up to about where it was. And by international, I mean just globally. I think the industry is growing at approximately 5 to 7% per annum in registrations and revenues. So there's continues to be growth in the business, and I think it may change sometime. It may turn around. It may contract. But I think that what's interesting is just how the Internet continues to expand and touch our lives in so many different ways, and it's really up to consumers in the market to decide. Do they want to use their Facebook name or a Twitter handle or their email address or some other tool as a primary contact means, or telephone numbers? These things will all change and coexist. So I'm not really sure where it's going to go. It'll be interesting.
Rod Beckstrom, what's the approval process on these 1,900 applications?
Well, they go through an initial evaluation phase, each of the applications, to see if all the information's complete and they're valid applications, et cetera. So they're all being worked through that process right now. And then the community and the organization will be developing some approach to order the processing of those or to process them as a whole group. And then there's an objection period that's very important that's open right now, and a comment period. So anyone listening to this program, if you hear about a new GTLD name that you either like or you don't like, you can go online to ICANN.org and you can file your comment right now on how you feel, either in support or objecting to any term. And there's also a formal objection process where parties with standing have an ability to actually file a specific objection. So, for example, if you own a trademark and you feel that someone has filed for a new top-level domain that has your trademark in it and they have no trademark rights, then you can file a specific objection and that will go to a review panel. And I would certainly predict that if you own the trademark and the applying party doesn't, then you're in a really good position to block that application. So the applications get processed. They have to get through the objections. If they get through the objections, if they get past the criminal background checks, the financial checks, the technical checks, et cetera, then eventually they will be put forward to the Board of ICANN for approval. And then after they're approved, they can subsequently be entered into the root of the Internet. So it's a process that takes time. The very earliest, you might be seeing something new in the root is about a year from now, and it may take some number of years to process this large number of applications.
And do you expect that most of those companies that are approved would then sell or offer as a service the option to create new sites using that domain suffix? Is that essentially what most of the proposals say?
We'll see. There's a range in the proposals. Some of the organizations will probably just use it. Let's say I'm a big company. I'm going to have .company name because I just want to be branded with my company name. I don't want to be advertising somebody else's .tld. So I might just use it for my primary website and not provide registrations to anyone else but my own employees. Or maybe I'm a broad-based internet provider and I want to provide free email addresses to people. Then some parties may be providing millions of email addresses for free or domain names for free. So there's a whole set of different options that the parties have. It'll be interesting to see what what creativity comes out of it. And then you have some developers that are more investors that want to develop a new category and create community and or a business model around whether it's a city and getting registrants from a city or around a sport or any other kind of activity. So just quite a broad view, and they're all online. Again, people can go online and take a look at all the applications and the information that was submitted on how it's proposed they'll be used.
And finally, Rod Beckstrom, who succeeded you at ICANN, and what do you think the biggest challenges facing that organization are in the short term?
Sure. My immediate successor is Akram Attallah, who is the Chief Operating Officer I recruited, who's an excellent executive and just a superb operating leader, and I'm really pleased to see him stepping into the role. He's Lebanese, and I think that's really excellent in the sense that I was the fourth ICANN CEO, and I was the fourth one born in an English-speaking country, and I think it's great that we've got someone that was promoted from the inside and who comes from the non-English-speaking world. But he's filling a temporary role for about 3 months, and then Fadi Shahadi will be joining him, who's someone Akram had worked with previously, who's also Lebanese. And has a very strong background in technology and has also worked on open source issues. The challenges are very much, I think, the same ones we've dealt with. Continued internationalization and globalization of the organization, dealing with the geopolitical threats and challenges and national regulation challenges from around the world that might seek to impinge upon the domain name system and the integrity of the Internet, and then the execution of this very large and very complex top-level domain program.
Rod Beckstrom, former president and CEO of ICANN and former director of the National Cybersecurity Center, thank you for being on the Communicators from Vegas. Also joining us was Gautam Nagesh, editor of Congressional Quarterly's Technology Executive Briefing. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thanks for having me.